Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Beyond Practice podcast. I'm Taylor Grant, your host. And if you're a leader in a high-stakes field, you already know that following the same old best practices isn't enough. We've got to go beyond practice. We need to understand the why behind those practices and discover new ways to build resilience. And that's what this show is all about, putting best practices into your hands. So to kick things off, we're going to do a deep dive into some foundational change models that you've probably heard of. ADKAR Kotter's 8 steps and Lewin's change management model. Now you might be thinking I know those already. But stick with us because today we're going to uncover how they can be practical tools for building resilience, especially in disaster management. And I'm joined by Casey Bishop, an expert in organizational change and resilience, to help us unpack all of this.
It's great to be here, Taylor. And yeah, you're right. A lot of times these models are presented in a very theoretical way, so we're going to make them real today. Because in disaster management, when the pressure's on knowing how to guide your team through change effectively, that can be the difference between success and failure.
Exactly. So let's start with ADKAR. It's all about the people, right?
That's right. ADKAR really focuses on how each individual navigates change. It's a really practical model. It breaks the process down into 5 clear steps.
Okay, remind us, what are those 5 steps again?
It's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And what's really cool is that the first letter of each word spells out ADKAR. So it's easy to remember. Each stage builds on the one before it.
I remember learning about this in school, but it always felt a bit theoretical. Can you give us a real-world example of how ADKAR would play out in disaster management?
Absolutely. Let's say you're rolling out a new emergency communication system. Maybe after a major hurricane exposed weaknesses in the old one. So we're thinking about that awareness stage. It's not enough to just send out an email, announcing the new system. You need to explain why the old system failed and how this new one will prevent similar problems in the future. Share a powerful story from the last hurricane that really illustrates the need for change.
That makes sense. A story like that would really hit home and make people understand the why behind the change.
Yeah.
And then I guess the desire stage would be about getting people excited about using the new system.
Right. Exactly. You need to get people to want to adopt the new system. That could involve addressing their concerns, highlighting the benefits, and showing them how it'll make their jobs easier or even safer.
Then comes the knowledge part.
Yes, you've got to provide them with the training and information they need to actually use the new system effectively.
Okay, and then ability.
Ability, that means making sure they can actually use the new system, make sure the system is user-friendly, the training's effective, and people have the support they need to apply what they've learned.
Okay, and lastly, reinforcement.
Yeah, reinforcement is so important for long-term success. You need to celebrate successes, provide ongoing support, and address any issues that pop up. It's about making this new system a natural part of their workflow.
It's like you're giving people a roadmap for the change process, step by step.
I like that. Exactly. You're not just throwing a new system at people, you're guiding them through each stage.
Okay, so ADKAR is great for understanding the individual side of change. But what about when you're dealing with larger scale change across an entire organization?
That's where Kotter's 8-step model comes in.
Okay, so let's unpack Kotter's 8-step model. It's a much broader lens, right?
Yes, it's more about leading large-scale transformation and shifting the entire organization's approach, which is really important when you're talking about building resilience in disaster management.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the first step?
The first step is creating a sense of urgency. Sometimes people are resistant to change. It's human nature. But if you can really show them why change is critical, they're much more likely to get on board.
That makes sense, especially in disaster management. We often hear about situations where a lack of urgency led to, tragic consequences. What comes to mind?
Oh, absolutely. Think back to Hurricane Katrina. There were so many warning signs, but a lack of urgency from local governments to federal agencies. It really contributed to that devastating impact. If those in charge had applied Kotter's model and effectively created that sense of urgency, things might have turned out very differently.
Wow, that's a really powerful example of why that sense of urgency is so crucial, especially when lives are at stake. Okay, so once you establish that urgency, what's next?
The next step is to form a powerful guiding coalition. So you need to assemble a team of influential people who will champion the change and drive it forward. This coalition needs to be diverse, representing different parts of the organization.
I'm starting to see how this could be applied to something like implementing a new disaster preparedness plan for like a whole city.
Exactly. You need key people from emergency services, city government, community organizations, even the private sector, all working together to drive that change.
That makes a lot of sense. And then what create a vision for change?
You're right on track. You need a clear and inspiring vision for the future. Think of it as a roadmap for where you want to go.
And that vision needs to be communicated effectively. Is that where the next step comes in?
Absolutely. Step 4 is all about communicating the vision. And it can't be just a one-time announcement. You need to constantly communicate it, answer questions, address concerns, keep people motivated. It's about making sure everyone understands the why behind the change and their role in making it happen.
Right, so that communication piece seems incredibly important, especially when you're dealing with a large-scale change initiative that involves so many people.
It's crucial. And that actually leads us to step 5, which is empower action by removing obstacles. You have to identify and address anything that's blocking people from embracing and implementing the change.
So that could be anything from bureaucratic red tape to outdated technology to a lack of training or resources.
Exactly. You need to create an environment where people feel empowered to act on the vision.
Okay, so you've established the urgency, built your coalition, you've communicated the vision, empowered action. What's next?
Next, you need to generate short-term wins, step 6. So it's about creating small victories along the way to keep people motivated and to show them that progress is being made.
So instead of trying to tackle everything at once, you're breaking it down into smaller, achievable goals.
Precisely, these short-term wins provide evidence that the change is working and build momentum for the larger transformation.
That's a great strategy for keeping people engaged and preventing them from getting discouraged, especially with these complex changes. So what happens once you've achieved those short-term wins?
Yeah, that's where step 7 comes in, don't let up. It's easy to get complacent after a few early wins, but it's crucial to keep pushing forward and not declare victory too soon.
You're saying it's important to use that momentum to tackle even bigger challenges and just keep driving the change forward.
Exactly, building on those successes and pushing for even greater change until that vision is fully realized.
That makes sense. It's about staying focused on that long-term goal.
Okay, so we've established urgency, built a coalition, created a vision, empowered action-generated short-term wins. And we're maintaining that momentum. What's the final step?
The final step is to make it stick. This is all about embedding the change in the organizational culture so it becomes the new normal. You need to make sure that those new ways of working are reflected in policies, processes, and reward systems.
So it's about making sure the change is sustainable and it doesn't just fade away.
Exactly, weaving the change into the fabric of the organization so it becomes part of who you are and how you operate.
That's a powerful way to look at it. You're not just implementing a change, you're transforming the culture itself. So we've talked about ADKAR, which is great for understanding individual change, and Kotter's 8 steps, which provides a framework for large-scale transformation. Now let's move on to Lewin's change management model, which provides a simple yet powerful way to visualize the whole change process. It really does. It's so elegant in its simplicity. And I think you'll find it particularly helpful for guiding your team through change, especially in those high-pressure disaster management situations.
I'm eager to hear more. So how does Lewin's model work?
Okay, think of it like this. Imagine you have a block of ice that you want to reshape. You can't just start carving it. You need to first unfreeze the ice, then mold it into that new shape you want, and finally refreeze it so that it holds its new form.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So the unfreeze stage is all about preparing for change.
Exactly. Recognizing that the current way of doing things isn't working, breaking down old mindsets, and creating a willingness to embrace something new.
So in disaster management, that might involve acknowledging the limitations of your existing emergency response plan, or recognizing the need to adopt new technologies to improve communication during a crisis.
Precisely shaking things up, getting people out of their comfort zones, and creating that sense of urgency for change.
And then the change stage, that's where the actual transformation happens.
This is where you implement those new systems, processes, or behaviors.
So that's where you would actually roll out that new emergency response plan, or start using that new communication technology.
Right, the action phase where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Okay, and then comes the refreeze stage.
Yes, and this stage is often overlooked, but it's absolutely critical for making sure the change sticks.
So what does refreezing look like in practice?
It's about reinforcing the new behaviors, celebrating successes, and making those changes part of the everyday routine.
So it's not enough to just implement the new emergency response plan. You need to make sure it's being used consistently, that people are trained on it regularly, and that it's constantly being evaluated and improved.
Exactly. And that refreeze stage is so crucial for building resilience because it helps ensure that those changes become ingrained in the organizational culture.
So even under the intense pressure of a disaster, the team can effectively execute the plan and recover more quickly.
Precisely. It's about creating a new normal, a new baseline for how things are done.
That's incredibly powerful. So we've got these three models, ADKAR, Kotter, and Lewin, and each one offers a unique perspective on managing change. But are they mutually exclusive? Do you have to choose just one?
That's a great question, and answer is no, you don't have to choose just one. In fact, you can use them in a complementary way to create a more holistic and effective approach to change.
Okay, so how would you go about combining these models in practice?
Well, think of it like this. Think of it like this. ADKAR is your guide for understanding how individuals move through the change process. So as you're working through Kotter's 8 steps, building that coalition, communicating that vision, empowering action, you can use the principles of ADKAR to make sure you're addressing the individual needs and concerns at each stage.
So for example, when you're creating a sense of urgency in Kotter's model, you could use the awareness and desire stages of ADKAR to make sure people understand why the change is necessary and get them on board with it.
Exactly. And when you're empowering action in Kotter's model, you can use the knowledge and ability stages of ADKAR to make sure people have the training and support they need to actually implement the change.
And then Lewin's model provides that overarching framework for the entire change journey.
Right. You're unfreezing the old ways of doing things as you're building that sense of urgency and forming your guiding coalition. Then you're moving through the change stage as you implement the vision and empower action. And finally, you're refreezing the new ways of working as you make it stick and embed those changes in the culture.
I love how these models all fit together. It's like they're pieces of a puzzle, each one contributing to the bigger picture of successful change management.
Exactly. And when you use them together, you can create a much more robust and effective approach to leading change, especially in those high-pressure, high-stakes environments like disaster management.
So I'm starting to see how understanding these models can be a real game changer for leaders in disaster management. But can you give us some more concrete examples of how these models can be used in practice to build resilience?
Absolutely. Let's say you're implementing a new emergency response protocol after a recent disaster. Maybe it highlighted some gaps in your existing procedures. Well, you can use ADKAR to make sure everyone on your team understands those new procedures, feels confident in their abilities, and really embraces the change.
So you're saying it's not enough to just hand them a manual. You need to really guide them through each stage of that ADK model.
Exactly. It's about taking a people-centric approach to change.
That makes a lot of sense. What about Kotter's model? How could you use that to build resilience in disaster management?
Kotter's model is particularly valuable when you need to drive a broader cultural shift towards proactive risk management. In disaster management, it's not enough to just react to events as they happen. You need to create a culture where anticipating and mitigating risks is everyone's responsibility.
That's a really important point. It's about shifting from a reactive mindset to a proactive one.
Exactly. And Kotter's model gives you that roadmap for doing just that. You can use his steps to create a sense of urgency around building a more proactive risk management culture. Build a coalition of leaders who will champion that vision and empower everyone in the organization to take ownership of risk mitigation.
So it's about creating a culture where everyone is thinking ahead, identifying potential risks,
Yeah,
and taking steps to mitigate them before they turn into disasters.
precisely. And that kind of proactive mindset can dramatically enhance resilience.
Okay, and what about Lewin's model? How could you use that to enhance resilience in a disaster management context?
I think Lewin's model is especially valuable when you need to help a team adapt to a new disaster recovery plan.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, think about the unfreeze stage. It's about helping people let go of old assumptions or practices that might hinder their ability to adapt to that new plan. Maybe the old plan was focused primarily on immediate response, while the new plan emphasizes long-term recovery and community rebuilding.
So it's about recognizing that what worked in the past might not be the best approach for the future, especially in a field like disaster management that's constantly evolving.
Right, and then the change stage is where you would actually implement and train everyone on that new plan. But it's that refreeze stage that's critical for ensuring that the new plan becomes ingrained in the organization's DNA, so to speak. So even under the pressure of a disaster, the team can effectively execute the plan and recover more swiftly.
It's about making those new behaviors and procedures automatic, almost like muscle memory.
Exactly. And that's how you build true resilience.
So we've explored these three really powerful models, ADKAR, Kotter, and Lewin. And we've discussed how they can be practically applied in disaster management to enhance resilience.
And remember, these models aren't mutually exclusive. You can use them together to create a truly holistic approach to change. You might use ADKAR for specific implementations, Kotter for broader cultural shifts, and Lewin to visualize and guide the whole change journey. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job and recognizing that they can all work together to make you a more effective leader.
This has been incredibly insightful, and I'm sure our listeners are already thinking about how they can apply these models in their own organizations.
I hope so, because at the end of the day, these models are all about helping people navigate change successfully and building more resilient organizations. Let's imagine a scenario where a coastal city is facing, the increasing threat of rising sea levels, and the city leaders realize they need to make some major changes to adapt and protect their community. And they decide to use a combination of ADKAR, Kotter, and Lewin to guide this whole complex change process.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk us through how they might use these models together.
So first, they'd use Cotter's model to establish that sense of urgency. They might present data on, projected sea level rise, the potential economic impact, the risks to public safety, and they could even bring in, someone who's been personally impacted by coastal flooding to share their story, to really bring it home for people. And then they form a powerful guiding coalition, bringing together city officials, community leaders, scientists, engineers to create that comprehensive adaptation plan.
So they're building that sense of urgency, bringing in those personal stories to really connect with people, and assembling a diverse team to lead the change. I can already see how powerful that combination would be.
Absolutely. And then to make sure that message really gets through, they leverage ADKR to help everyone in the community understand the need for change. So they hold those town hall meetings. They create educational materials that are easy to understand, use social media to raise awareness about the risks of sea level rise and the importance of taking action.
They're building awareness, generating desire within the community. Those are the first two stages of ADKR, right?
Yeah. You got it. And here's where it gets really interesting. As they move forward with developing and implementing their adaptation plan, which could include things like, building seawalls, restoring wetlands, or even relocating some critical infrastructure, they continue to draw on ADKAR to make sure everyone has the knowledge, skills, and resources they need to adapt. So maybe they provide training programs for residents on how to prepare their homes for flooding, work with businesses to develop resilient strategies, and invest in those infrastructure improvements to protect those critical assets.
So they're not just telling people, hey, sea levels are rising, deal with it. They're actively equipping people with the tools and knowledge they need to adapt and thrive in this changing environment.
Exactly. And they're doing all of this within that framework of Lewin's model. Think about it. They're unfreezing those old ways of thinking, that assumption that the city's immune to the effects of climate change. They're implementing the changes outlined in their adaptation plan. That's the change stage. And then they're refreezing these new behaviors and practices, making them part of the city's culture and long-term planning.
So it's not just about building physical structures to protect the city. It's about changing the way people think and act, creating that culture of resilience.
You nailed it. It's about creating a new normal, a new way of life that takes into account the realities of a changing climate.
Wow. That's a powerful example of how these models can be combined to tackle a really complex, multifaceted challenge.
And it highlights how leaders can use these models to not only manage change, but to actually drive transformation and create a more resilient future.
This has been such an inspiring conversation. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools for approaching change and building resilience.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, these models are just the starting point. The real magic happens when you take these principles and apply them to your own unique challenges and context.
That's a great reminder. To all of you listening out there, I encourage you to explore these models, further experiment with them, and see how they can help you lead change and build resilience in your own organizations. We've got a ton of resources waiting for you on our website to get you started.
Just head over to www.beyondpracticepodcast.com to download templates, case studies, all the tools we talked about today.
And we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what resonated with you, what questions you have. You can reach us at connect@beyondpracticepodcast.com.
We read every message.
And of course, a huge thank you to our amazing producer, Jason, for all his hard work behind the scenes.
Thanks, Jason. You're the best.
Couldn't have done it without you.
Yeah.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this first episode of the Beyond Practice podcast. We're so excited to be on this journey with you. Until next time, stay curious, stay resilient, and keep going beyond practice.